Before we can ever speak about walking daily with the Holy Spirit, we must come to a clear and living understanding of who He truly is. So many people try to follow, try to listen, try to surrender, yet they are uncertain about the very one they are surrendering to. And that uncertainty creates distance. The Holy Spirit is not a distant force. He is not an emotion that comes and goes. He is not merely a feeling that rises during a moment of worship and fades when life becomes ordinary again. He is a person present, aware, attentive, and deeply involved in every detail of your life. He knows you completely. He understands your thoughts before you speak them, your struggles before you confess them, and your needs before you even recognize them yourself. And yet He does not force His way into your life. He waits to be welcomed. He waits to be acknowledged. He waits for a heart that is willing to walk with Him. Many people live their lives aware of God in a distant way, but unfamiliar with the nearness of the Holy Spirit. They pray upward, but they do not realize that He is within, gently speaking, quietly leading, constantly drawing them closer. And until that realization becomes real, walking with Him will always feel like something distant rather than something deeply personal. He is your comforter in moments when no one else understands. When your heart is heavy and words cannot express what you feel, He is there interpreting the silence, bringing peace where there was confusion. He does not simply observe your pain, He steps into it with you. He is your teacher, not only in great spiritual matters, but in the simple daily decisions of life. He guides you into truth, not by overwhelming you, but by gently illuminating the right path. Sometimes it comes as a quiet knowing, sometimes as a pause in your spirit, sometimes as an unexplainable peace or even a restraint that keeps you from going where you should not go. And oh, how important it is to recognize that voice. Because if you do not recognize His voice, you may ignore it, and if you ignore it long enough, you may begin to believe He is silent when in truth He has been speaking all along. He is also your guide. He does not only comfort and teach, He leads, step by step, moment by moment, not always with loud instructions, but often with gentle impressions that require trust. Walking with Him means learning to move when He prompts and to pause when He restrains. And here is where so many struggle. They expect something dramatic, something unmistakable, something that cannot be questioned. But the Holy Spirit often works in the quiet places, in the stillness of your heart, in the simplicity of a surrendered thought. If you are always waiting for something loud, you may miss the whisper. To walk with Him daily, you must begin by acknowledging Him daily. Not as an idea, but as a real presence. When you wake up, He is there. When you make decisions, He is there. When you face uncertainty, He is there. He is not visiting your life, He is dwelling within it. And when that truth settles deeply into your heart, something begins to change. Your prayers become conversations. Your decisions become guided. Your life becomes less about striving and more about responding. You begin to realize that you are not walking alone, not even for a moment. And suddenly, surrender no longer feels like loss, it feels like relief. Because you are no longer trying to carry what was never meant for you to carry. You are walking with one who sees the end from the beginning, who understands every step before it is taken, and who loves you with a depth that cannot be measured. And when you truly know who He is, you will no longer hesitate to trust Him with everything. And once you begin to understand who the Holy Spirit truly is, once He is no longer distant, no longer unfamiliar, then the next step becomes both simple and deeply challenging. It is the step of surrender. Surrender is a word that many hear but few fully embrace. It is often misunderstood. It is seen as loss, as giving something up, as laying aside control in a way that feels uncertain. But true surrender is not weakness. It is not defeat. It is the highest form of trust. To surrender means to place your life into hands that are far more capable than your own. It means releasing the need to control every outcome, every decision, every detail, and instead allowing the Holy Spirit to lead with wisdom that surpasses your understanding. You see, the struggle is not in knowing that God's way is better. Most people believe that. The struggle is in letting go of their own way. There is something within human nature that clings to control. We want to plan, to decide, to predict. We want to feel secure in what we can see and understand. And yet, the life led by the Holy Spirit often calls you beyond what you can see. It invites you into a place where trust must replace certainty. And that is where surrender begins. It begins quietly, often in the unseen places of the heart. It begins when you choose to say, "Not my will, but yours." Not once, not occasionally, but daily, sometimes even moment by moment. Because surrender is not a single decision, it is a continuous posture. There will be times when the Holy Spirit prompts you in a direction that does not make sense. Times when He asks you to wait when you want to move, or to move when you feel unprepared. And in those moments, surrender becomes very real. Will you trust him even when you do not understand? Will you release what you are holding on to, even when it feels important? Will you lay down your own desires, your own timing, your own plans, and allow him to lead? This is where many hesitate, not because they do not love God, but because they fear what surrender might require. They fear losing something, missing out, or stepping into uncertainty. But what they do not yet see is this: surrender does not take from you, it frees you. It frees you from the burden of trying to control what you were never meant to control. It frees you from the weight of decisions that overwhelm your understanding. It frees you from striving, from anxiety, from the constant need to figure everything out on your own. When you truly surrender, you are not stepping into loss, you are stepping into rest. And yet surrender will always cost something. It will cost your pride. It will cost your need to be right. It will cost your attachment to your own plans. It will require you to trust even when your emotions resist. But what you receive in return is far greater. You receive direction instead of confusion, peace instead of striving, clarity instead of fear, and a deep assurance that your life is being guided by one who never makes mistakes. Surrender is not passive, it is active trust. It is choosing again and again to yield when everything in you wants to take control. It is opening your hands and saying, Lord, whatever you desire, that is what I choose. And over time, something begins to change within you. The resistance fades, the fear lessens, the need to control weakens. And in its place, a quiet confidence begins to grow. A confidence not in yourself, but in him. You begin to see that his way is not only better, it is kinder, more precise, more faithful than anything you could have arranged on your own. And so surrender becomes less of a struggle and more of a desire. Because when you have tasted the peace that comes from letting go, you no longer want to return to the burden of holding on. And in that place, where your will is no longer fighting his, you will discover the beginning of a life that is truly led by the Spirit. And that is where real walking with him begins. And when the heart has begun to surrender, when control is no longer held so tightly, something beautiful begins to unfold, a growing sensitivity to the voice of the Holy Spirit. You see, he has always been speaking. From the very beginning, his voice has been present, steady, gentle, faithful. But so often, it is not his silence that keeps us from hearing. It is the noise within us, the distractions, the fears, the constant movement of our own thoughts can become so loud that the whisper of the Spirit is easily overlooked. Learning to recognize his voice is not about striving to hear something dramatic. It is about becoming still enough, open enough, and willing enough to notice what has been there all along. His voice does not compete for attention. He does not force himself into your decisions. He does not overwhelm you with pressure. Instead, he draws you. He nudges you. He impresses upon your heart with a quiet certainty that cannot always be explained, but can be deeply known. There are moments when it comes as peace, a deep settling assurance that rests within you, even when circumstances around you remain uncertain. And there are moments when it comes as a gentle restraint, something within you that says, do not go there or wait just a little longer. It may not be loud, but it is clear when you learn to recognize it. And then there are those times when he brings truth to your remembrance. A word, a passage, a truth that rises within you at exactly the moment you need it, not by coincidence but by his faithful guidance. But here is where the heart must become attentive. Because if you rush through your days, if your life is constantly filled with noise and urgency, you may miss him. Not because he is absent, but because you have not created the space to notice his presence. Sensitivity to his voice grows in the quiet places. It grows when you pause, when you listen, when you choose to value his leading above your own thoughts. It grows when prayer becomes more than speaking and begins to include listening. So often prayer is filled with words, requests, concerns, desires, spoken one after another. And yet how often do we remain still long enough to hear his response? There is a depth of relationship that begins to form when you are no longer the only one speaking. It is in those moments of stillness that you begin to discern the difference between your own thoughts and his leading. And yes, there is a difference. Your own thoughts may be hurried, uncertain, sometimes driven by emotion. But his voice carries a distinct peace, a clarity that does not strive, a direction that aligns with truth. And as you continue to walk with him, you begin to recognize that voice more quickly. What once felt uncertain becomes familiar. What once felt difficult becomes natural. But sensitivity also requires willingness, because it is one thing to hear and another to respond. There will be times when the Holy Spirit prompts you in simple ways, a kind word to someone, A moment of patience when you would rather react. A quiet conviction to turn away from something that does not align with his will. And in those moments you are given a choice to respond or to ignore. Every response sharpens your sensitivity. Every act of obedience strengthens your ability to hear. And every time you ignore that gentle prompting, it becomes just a little easier to overlook it again. This is why daily awareness matters. Not occasional, not when it is convenient, but daily. From the smallest decisions to the larger ones, inviting him into each moment creates a life that is no longer led by impulse, but by guidance. And slowly something begins to shift. You are no longer guessing your way through life. You are no longer relying only on your own understanding. There is a partnership forming, a quiet, steady leading that brings direction where there was once uncertainty, and you begin to realize that he is not only with you in the extraordinary moments, but in the ordinary ones as well. In conversations, in decisions, in thoughts, he is there faithfully guiding, patiently speaking. And as your sensitivity grows, so does your confidence, not in yourself, but in his ability to lead you well, because you have begun to recognize his voice. And once you truly recognize his voice, you will never again be satisfied to live without listening for it. And as that sensitivity to his voice begins to grow, as you start to recognize those gentle promptings and quiet impressions, there comes a moment where something deeper is required. Because hearing him, as beautiful as it is not the end, it is the beginning. The true depth of walking with the Holy Spirit is revealed in obedience. It is revealed in what you do with what you hear. There is a sacred connection between his voice and your response. And it is in that response that your relationship with him is either strengthened or slowly weakened. Not because he withdraws, but because your willingness determines how closely you walk with him. Obedience is not always dramatic. In fact, most of the time it is found in the smallest, quietest moments of your day. It is in the choice to pause when you feel that gentle restraint instead of moving ahead quickly. It is in the decision to speak kindly when everything within you wants to react differently. It is in turning away from something that may seem harmless, yet you sense within your spirit that it is not right for you. These moments may appear insignificant, but they are not, because every act of obedience, no matter how small, is a declaration. It is a quiet but powerful statement that says, I trust you more than I trust myself. And trust, when expressed through obedience, deepens your walk with him in a way that nothing else can. There will be times when obedience feels easy, when his leading aligns with your desires, when it makes sense, when it feels comfortable. But there will also be times when it does not. Times when he asks you to forgive when you feel justified in holding on. Times when he leads you to wait when you are eager to move forward. Times when he calls you to step out when you feel unprepared or uncertain. And in those moments, obedience becomes a true act of surrender. It is no longer about what feels right, it is about what he is saying. And this is where many hesitate. Not because they do not hear, but because they weigh his leading against their own understanding. They pause, they question, they reason, and sometimes in that hesitation, the moment passes. But the Holy Spirit does not lead randomly. He does not guide without purpose. Every prompting carries intention, even when it is not immediately clear to you. Obedience then becomes an act of faith. It is stepping forward without needing to see the entire path. It is trusting that the one who leads you sees what you cannot. And it is believing that his direction is always rooted in wisdom, even when it challenges your comfort. And something remarkable happens when you begin to obey consistently. Your sensitivity sharpens, his voice becomes clearer. Not because he begins to speak more, but because you have positioned your heart to respond more quickly, more freely, more completely. There is a flow that begins to develop, a rhythm between his leading and your obedience. And in that rhythm, your walk with him becomes steady, alive, and deeply personal. But it is important to understand this. Delayed obedience is still resistance. When you sense his leading and choose to wait, to postpone, to set it aside for later, you interrupt that flow. Not because he has stopped leading, but because you have stepped out of alignment. And yet even then he remains patient. He does not condemn, he gently draws you back. He gives you another opportunity to respond, another chance to say yes, because his desire is not perfection, it is willingness, a heart that is ready to obey, even when it is difficult, even when it costs something, even when it stretches you beyond what feels natural. And over time, obedience begins to shape you. It softens your heart, it aligns your desires, it transforms your thinking. You begin to want what he wants, to choose what he chooses, to walk in a way that reflects his nature. And what once felt like sacrifice begins to feel like freedom. Because you are no longer bound to your impulses, your fears, your uncertainties. You are being led step by one who knows exactly where you need to go. And in that place, obedience is no longer a struggle. It becomes your response of love. Because when you truly trust him, when you truly know his heart, saying yes becomes the most natural thing you can do. And it is in that simple, faithful yes that your walk with him is strengthened beyond measure. And as obedience becomes your response, as you begin to say yes more freely and more consistently, you will find that the Holy Spirit gently leads you into a deeper work, one that touches the very core of who you are. It is the quiet daily surrender of self. This is where the walk becomes truly transformative. Because it is one thing to follow his guidance in what you do, but it is something far deeper to allow him to shape who you are. And that shaping often begins with what must be released. There are desires within us that do not align with his will. There are habits that feel natural, yet pull us away from his leading. There are thoughts, reactions, and patterns that have been formed over time so familiar that we hardly question them. And yet, as you walk with him, he begins to gently place his finger on these areas. Not to condemn you, not to shame you, but to free you. The life led by the Holy Spirit is not built upon adding more effort, more striving, more pressure. It is built upon surrendering what does not belong, so that what is true and life-giving can take its place. And this is where the phrase dying to self becomes real. It is not a dramatic moment reserved for a single experience. It is a daily choice, a quiet yielding, a willingness to say, this part of me no longer leads. Your spirit leads instead. There will be moments when your natural response rises quickly, anger, impatience, pride, fear, and in that very moment you will sense something different within you. A gentle pause, a quiet nudge, an invitation to respond another way. That is where the choice lies. Will you follow what feels natural, or will you yield to what the Spirit is prompting? Dying to self does not mean losing your identity. It means discovering your true identity, one that is no longer shaped by the limitations of your old nature, but by the presence of the Holy Spirit within you. And yes, there is a cost. There are things you will have to release, attitudes you once justified, behaviors you once excused, desires you once held tightly. It may feel uncomfortable at first. It may even feel like loss. But what you are releasing was never meant to sustain you. And what you receive in return is life. A deeper peace that is not easily shaken. A patience that does not come from effort but from within. A love that extends beyond what you thought you were capable of. A self-control that steadies you in moments where you once felt overwhelmed. This is the work of the Spirit. He does not merely guide your steps, he transforms your nature. And over time you begin to notice the change. Not always in dramatic ways, but in the quiet consistency of your responses. Situations that once disturbed you no longer have the same hold. Reactions that once came quickly are replaced with a calm that feels unfamiliar yet deeply right. This is not something you manufacture, it is something you yield to. Because the more you surrender, the more space you create for the Holy Spirit to work within you. And the more he works within you, the more your life begins to reflect him. It is not perfection, it is transformation, and it happens daily. Sometimes slowly, sometimes in ways you do not immediately recognize, but it is steady, faithful, real. And in this process you begin to understand something profound. The life you once tried to manage on your own was never meant to be lived that way. You were meant to be led. You were meant to be transformed. You were meant to live not by striving but by yielding. And as self begins to lose its hold, the Spirit begins to take his rightful place, not just as a guide beside you, but as the very life within you. And in that place, you are no longer simply trying to follow him, you are living by him. And when a life begins to be shaped in this way, when surrender is no longer resisted, when his voice is no longer ignored, when obedience becomes natural, and the self no longer sits at the center, something beautiful begins to unfold. It is not forced. It is not something you strive to produce. It is the result of a life that is truly led by the Holy Spirit. You begin to experience a depth of peace that cannot be explained by circumstances. It is not the kind of peace that depends on everything going well. It remains even when things are uncertain, even when answers are not clear, even when life feels stretched beyond your comfort. There is a quiet assurance within you that you are not alone, that you are being led, and that nothing is outside of his awareness. This kind of peace changes the way you live. You are no longer driven by anxiety, no longer overwhelmed by the need to control every outcome. There is a resting place within your spirit, a stillness that steadies you even when everything around you feels unsettled. And along with peace comes clarity. Not always in the sense that every detail is revealed, but in the confidence that you are moving in the right direction. Decisions become less about fear and more about trust. You begin to sense when to move forward and when to wait. There is a growing assurance that you are not navigating life blindly but being guided step by step. This does not mean challenges disappear. It does not mean life becomes effortless. But it does mean that you face those challenges differently. Because you are no longer relying on your own strength alone. There is a quiet strength that begins to rise within you. A resilience that does not come from determination, but from the presence of the Holy Spirit at work inside you. You find yourself standing in situations where you once would have been shaken. You find yourself responding with grace where you once would have reacted. And sometimes you pause and realize you are not the same. This is the evidence of a spirit-led life. It is not always loud, it is not always seen by others immediately, but it is deeply real. And then there is purpose. A life surrendered to the Holy Spirit is never empty. It is never without direction. Even in seasons that feel quiet, there is meaning. Even in moments that seem small, there is significance. You begin to understand that your life is not slothful, not without intention. There is a divine leading, a shaping, a placing of you exactly where you need to be. Conversations become meaningful. Encounters carry weight. When even the simplest acts begin to reflect something greater than yourself. You are no longer just living, you are being led with purpose. And with that purpose comes fruit. Not something you strain to produce, but something that naturally flows from a life connected to Him. Love that reaches beyond convenience. Joy that is not dependent on circumstances. Patience that holds steady, kindness that becomes instinctive, faithfulness that remains consistent. These are not qualities you force into existence. They are the result of abiding, of remaining, of walking closely with the Holy Spirit day by day. And perhaps one of the most beautiful aspects of this life is this: you begin to reflect Him. Not perfectly, not all at once, but steadily. Your thoughts begin to align with His truth. Your desires begin to reflect His heart. Your responses begin to mirror His nature. And without striving to become something, you are being transformed into someone who carries His presence in a way that others can sense. People may not always understand it, they may not always be able to explain it, but they will recognize that there is something different. And that difference is not you, it is Him within you. This is what it means to live a fulfilled life. Not a life without difficulty, but a life filled with His presence. Not a life where everything is controlled, but a life that is guided. Not a life built on your own strength, but one sustained by His Spirit. And as you continue to walk in this way, you will come to realize that there is nothing more satisfying, nothing more complete, nothing more deeply fulfilling than a life fully surrendered and led by the Holy Spirit. Because in the end, it is not about what you achieve, it is about who is leading you every step of the way.